Excellent. So now we have the privilege of discussing a pretty important topic, accelerating medical device development and regulatory submissions using a customer-centric agile approach. And we have our esteemed speaker, Subhrangshu Datta here. I'll introduce you, Subh. So you're an expert, associate partner at McKinsey and Company, a senior leader in the firm's LEAP, New Business Build, and MedTech practice. You're very passionate about solving the last mile problem in global healthcare innovation. You have over 15 plus years in progressive global leadership and C-suite experience, building and scaling medical devices, and particularly digital health businesses at Smith & Nephew, EMD Serono, and multiple venture-backed startups. You have an MBA from MIT, MS in Engineering, Systems from MIT School of Engineering, MS and Masters of Science in Engineering from Ohio State, and a Bachelor's of Engineering and Metallurgic Engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology. Oh boy, that's a bunch of degrees, Subh. When not working or studying, you can find Subh traveling the world, cooking and experiencing global foods and cultures. So without further ado, the platform's yours.
Thank you so much, Shahid. Good morning to everyone. Really glad to be here. So I'm going to share my screen to get started. Can everybody see my screen? Shahid, you can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. So thank you again. It's a real pleasure. And today we're going to be talking about a very important topic and something that's really near and dear to my heart. Talking about medical device development and really how do we use Agile to bring the voice of the customer and accelerate the process. So before we start, first question. You weren't expecting a pop quiz here, were you? So first question for the group here. In your experience, how long does it take to develop a typical medical device from concept to launch? And I would request you to put your answers in the Q&A section, and we'll come back to that. Yeah. And a second question is, now if you think about it, like a cash-starved Silicon Valley software company, a software startup, what does that duration look like? If you could put those answers in the Q&A section as well, that'd be great. So I'll give you guys a minute. Great. So historically speaking, from my own experience, both as a product owner and what I call a recovering R&D engineer, I remember the fastest launch of a medical device has been measured in years, yeah, not months. So by the way, that makes sense, right? After all, what we do, what we develop, we are in the business of saving lives, right? But the question becomes, is it possible to do both? Meaning, can we go fast? And dare I say, build an even better product? In other words, can we bring the agile methodology, which has become so popular in the software world, can we bring that to medical device development? Yeah. To start that, let's start off with something that all of us are familiar with, which is on the left side, which is the traditional waterfall development approach, right? This is something that all of us do on a day-to-day basis. We are all familiar with, and as rightly so, it starts with identifying the user needs, goes through the processes, you verify design inputs, and then finally you validate user needs and you launch a product, right? All good. But I remember talking to a CTO of a venture-backed startup I had the opportunity to work with. And when I was talking to him about development, one of the things he said, Sub, I don't like the phase gate process. Let us please not bring the phase gate process to what we do. And as I was thinking, I was like, why is that? And the points he made were so spot on, which is this process traditionally brings in the step-by-step, a very rigid step-by-step linear thinking, right? And what that means is that we can have a process that can get onerous, You have a lot of documentation where process can get in the way of progress. And the worst case, have a situation where we are hiding some challenges with the product because we haven't done a lot of prototyping through the process, and we go to market with something which is less than desirable. I recall working a long time back in a design team where we were building this really innovative, minimally invasive device that we launched, and during our first limited launch surgery, it bent. And we sighed with relief after that. Thank God we did a limited launch, and that helped us take out the product kinks. But little did we realize, thinking about it now, when I think about it backwards, is the process, the linear, rigid process we were following actually was part of the problem. So the reality is that the world is changing, right? The recent pandemic, or the pandemic that's going on today, has actually accelerated that whole change process. What that means is our processes, our dev processes, have to get significantly more agile. They have to get faster to make sure that the opportunity cost, which as you can see can be significant, we don't lose that. Two is, as software becomes more and more part of the process, as the data that we've seen with our clients, the process gets starting to get even more complex, and we have to start thinking about electromechanical, fluidics, software, data analysis. How do all these pieces together? So the complexity is changing, and the product reliability is becoming increasingly more important. And by the way, you have to do all these things much faster. And what we've seen is, this is where a slight change in the way quality does its work can make so much difference. We have seen that when quality can partner with the product owner, we can together set the pace of the development and really use quality as a catalyst to unlocking value. And the results, as you can see here, are tremendous. So we bring this early customer-centric perspective into the design control process. And we have seen with our clients, we've seen over 50% acceleration of launch time. We've seen 25% reduction in churn, and where tire hits the road, a 30 to 40% reduction in complaints over the product life cycle, which all of us practitioners know can mean the difference between a successful product and almost a lemon. So where does Agile come in? So before we start, I'm going to spend maybe 30 seconds talking about having a quick primer on what Agile really is. So the history, which is interesting, Agile's history is actually in rugby, in reference to a team that is working towards a common goal. So Agile is grounded in these 4 core values, which are shown here. And these values are also known as, if you look up Wikipedia, if you Google this, you're going to find these 4 core values are what's called the manifesto for Agile software development. And this was established, interesting trivia, this was established by 17 engineers who decided to get together and do what engineers do, figure out how to solve problems. There were 17 of them who got together at this resort in Snowbird, Utah, and came up with these 4 core principles that now we see in different parts of the development process. First is focus on individuals and interactions over processes and tools. After all, what good is a process if it's getting in the way of progress? So once again, focus on individuals and interactions over processes and tools. 2 is working product over burdensome documentation. 3 is customer collaboration over contract negotiation, so that with the customer is core part of the development, so no surprises. And then finally, responding to change by allowing for flexibility, so that way we're doing continuous iteration to get to what we want to get to a product that the customer already knows and desires. And what that means specifically is what's shown here in terms of user-centric inputs, much more use of iteration, testing, change usability, and user feedback. So we are continuously course correcting. So let's bring this home. Now, as we discuss Agile, and we'll be spending a lot of time today talking about, we're talking about this iterative operating model. But one thing that is extremely important is to not lose sight of the Agile organization. And it's something I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about today, but that's something that is very critical to think about. Is after all, we human beings, we behave. Our behaviors are driven by incentives, and incentives are to a large extent defined by the structure in which we work. So this is something that is extremely important, and that to keep in mind, which means that start thinking in terms of product ownership, franchise leadership, which is more focused towards the product itself, towards the solution itself, as opposed to the traditional ways of thinking of solid lines and thinking in terms of functional areas. So you still have the matrix, but align the work closer to the customer, closer to the product that we are delivering. So this is a very important point. So something that I would request you not to lose sight of as we look at the operating model. So let's look at the operating model. Yeah. So there are 4 parts to the operating model that we have seen work. First is ensure the core tenets of an agile process which are transparency, visibility, end-to-end traceability. Yeah, so these core tenets are closely integrated in the design control process. It cannot be something that is separate. 2 is quality works in collaboration with the product owner. So the quality now moves from the traditional role of enforcer of documentation of compliance to becoming a true collaborator. 3 is we set up stand-ups, we set up KPIs that allow us to rapidly share progress and learnings. So we are enabling course correction, we're bringing speed and efficacy into the whole process. And finally, not shy away from digital tools, which are pretty popular today. There are several digital tools to look at. So really off-the-shelf digital tools that ensure transparency and help reduce the documentation burden. So let's jump into the 4 pieces. So the first is how do we have Agile? How can it embrace the design control requirements effectively, right? How would that work? So the answer is in effective use of sprints. So what is a sprint? So sprint is effectively short duration focused work to really deliver things in an iterative manner. Yeah, and that's something that we do on a daily basis as engineers anyway. But how do we formalize that and do this in a very focused, short duration manner and really follow through the process as shown as identify what the user need is, really focus the scope of work within that, identify what the user needs are, build a test plan, design it very closely with the customer, build prototypes, which obviously starts off as rough in the beginning and then gradually sharpens as you go through the process. And then continuously get feedback from all the cross-functional leaders, so that way the product that we are building is not an unobtainium product, right? We cannot make it, so cross-functional pieces go into it early, and also from a customer standpoint, it's ensuring that the product that we are building, the customers actually desire for. So putting in this design, these sprint cycles early and often, right through the user needs development generation process, through the product definition and planning process, and the dev process. So you have multiple sprints that are put in, so that way we are really going through this process very quickly, iterating, course correcting, and moving very fast in a transparent manner. And here's an example of something that we actually did. This was for a customer, for a client of ours, where they were looking to deploy a hybrid agile method for a SAMD product, which is software as a medical device. So what we did as we were integrating agile is we started and ended with something, with a process that all of us are comfortable with, which is the waterfall process, right? So we started off by looking at the waterfall process to start putting in the planning elements, and making sure the risk pieces have been thought of. And then we put in this iterative approach where the three things around software design, around test planning, and coding, they were happening in parallel, right? And they're continuously getting feedback. And then going back to the waterfall process and the stage gate process to really freeze the code. And at that point, when we froze the code, the product was actually had already touched the customer multiple times. So that way, what we were building is something that we knew was ready to go. So that's what we did, where Agile actually became a core part of design controls, so that we both work hand in hand. The second piece is about quality being a collaborator, right, as opposed to a gatekeeper, which is unfortunately the role that quality, at least in my experience, both as a practitioner and consultant, has become. So what does it mean, right? So what we've seen at our most successful clients who've done this well, quality acts as a liaison for the subsystem team. So you have these multiple subsystem teams that are pulled together, which are cross-functional teams. So really liaison with these cross-functional teams and working with the product owner to really bring these cross-functional input and the voice of the customer early and often. So as you can see in the schematic, things are starting off fairly broad, and things start to sharpen and converge as we get a better sense of what the product we want to go to market with, and eventually it converge into a final system integration and VNB. So once again, starting off broad, but continuously iterating, learning through the process, so that way at the end there are no surprises. So that way there's no surprise like finding out that the customer needs have changed, or we are building or we are designing something that we cannot produce. So those surprises go away as we use quality, the quality function, as a collaborator, as a strategic partner in bringing the whole team, the cross-functional teams together through the dev process. And with that comes to the third part, which probably in my mind is one of the most important parts, because we are really good at processes. We will put a process together as engineers, we can make it happen. But the part where I've seen a lot of challenges is how do we converge the culture and the organization structure, modern engineering practices and processes, and next generation technologies. How do we converge all of this to really deliver effectively? And for these elements, as you can see, these elements to work, two things I think are probably the most difficult to do and need to be kept in mind, because as engineers, as we think about the engineering practices, the different infrastructure tools, as we put those tools in place, things can happen. But tools are only as good as they get used, right? So the question becomes, how do we bring this single team mindset, as in we build, we operate, how do we bring that together? And a core part of that lies in ensuring that the individual MBOs or individual KPIs are how our team members' annual reviews happen. So have their objectives closely tied to the team performance or functional area. So that way the most important allegiance is to the team itself. And this is where a bunch of these meetings that we've seen, that they work really well, right? So having daily stand-ups, having the sprint planning meetings. So typically think in terms of 2-week sprints, having these planning meetings before, doing reviews after, doing these retrospective and stage gate reviews. Now, as you look at it, I have to be honest, right? It looks like a lot of meetings. And you might ask, hey, Sab, I thought the goal is to reduce documentation, to really spend more time on building stuff versus really working on documentation, etc. And the answer is that is actually true. I mean, if you're not careful, this can become a challenge, and which is what we have seen in many organizations. So that's why there are a few things to think about and really be conscious about. First, like 3 things I would point out. First, less is more. So stick to these suggested meeting times. So the stand up is really a stand up. You have 15 minutes. You use the digital tools that are available. Stick to these times and really go through a relentless focus, which comes to the second important point: a relentless, ruthless focus on results. And with that, what can be done to remove the hurdles so we can grow? In other words, we are celebrating and are open both about our wins, which are measured in results, and our challenges, be it technical, and here comes the difficult part, be it personal. So very important about it. And the third and probably the most important thing that we have to keep in mind as we do this is add quality measures and visualization tools which are off the shelf available today. Have them available and use them effectively to bring transparency to what it means both for the customer and customer internal cross-functional team members and our end users. And we're doing that through the entire process, through the use of these standard tools and bringing this visibility. And as individuals directly can see the result of their work on a daily basis, magic happens. So once again, 3 important things: less is more, relentless and ruthless focus on results and what can be done to remove hurdles, and 3, adding quality measures and clear visualization of the progress and what we are doing on a daily basis. What does that mean for our customer? And with that, I'll come to the last piece, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time because there's a lot of, I mean, if you Google it, you can find a ton of information on this. And I'm sure there are a lot of our colleagues who are on the call are also developing a lot of digital tools. So there's a lot that's available. You have to see what makes sense for us, for you as the product owner, as the developer, in terms of both collaboration, workflow management, and requirement management, so that it's simple, it's traceable, and you move towards EQMS solution. And again, on that, there's a bunch of them available in the marketplace. But key point to think about in terms of the features as mentioned here, right? It's supporting onboarding. It's in line with the latest standards. It allows for comprehensive design and documentation control, transfer to manufacturing, risk management, and really allows for this audit support. So these key elements of QMS are in here, and you're really working using QMS as a collaborative tool versus a compliance tool. So really thinking in those terms, so that way we can effectively support and navigate the agile working processes within the world of design controls. And I would like to end by giving an example. So it works, guys. This is an example. This is an actual case study we did with a client who came to us with a challenge that, hey, they wanted to develop this surgical robot. It was still in concept stage. For those of us who are from the industry, know the surgical robot market is increasingly crowded, both from current players as well as venture-backed startups. So the question the client came to us is, hey, how can we do this fast? Because the market is changing. We need to make sure we are taking care of the customer. Our customer needs are changing, and we have to be effectively differentiated. And what we did was we were, as we were looking at the process of this big struggle our client had was, historically surgical robot development can take years, right? So this is a long drawn process. So how can we take a product which has notoriously long design cycles and work in this new environment? So we partnered with the client and put in the framework that I talked about earlier, right before this. And the results were absolutely phenomenal, as shown here. We went from dev of a concept to commercial release in 18 months. We allowed ourselves to pivot after 3 months, right? In terms of really understanding and proactively talking to customers and working towards a product that the customer needs. We were able to go through and iterate through 3 generations of product within those 18 months. And we were able to really shorten the clinical validation by at least 25%. So significant improvements was able to be done as we are bringing the voice of the customer and using this constant communication and agile process in the development itself. So in other words, bottom line, guys, is the process works. And all we need is a willingness to try and be ruthlessly focused on what our users want, what our customers want, both internal and external, and enable the process to actually accelerate progress. Thank you.
Wonderful. And yeah, I know you had a couple questions in the beginning, so Ben, to answer to some of them, I think your first question, Jens, said 6 years. Vito said 10 to 15 years. Robert Kemp, who's a VP Market Access of Zamboni Group, said 7 to 10 years. And then your next question, Amy Spiney from BD said, from concept to launch depends on the complexity of the products. Average is 5 years. But Vito said dilution for founders. So if you want to say any remarks to those.
Thank you. The points are spot on. I mean, I remember my first big device that we made. It took us. This was a surgical, minimally invasive surgical device. It took us a good 4 years to build it, right? And you're right. I mean, it could easily be 7 to 10 years, 5 years, and this is where the agile process, as I was showing, can actually do wonders. And the example was a real example where we helped our client working shoulder to shoulder, and that's something that we at McKinsey have built a new practice called LEAP, which is the practice I'm a part of, where we work closely with our clients to work in joint teams to build new businesses, to help think through some of these design aspects. We have a full team of designers. It's something that I didn't know before I joined McKinsey was McKinsey, in fact, has on staff the largest number of product designers in the world. So big group of strong designers and working with our client to shorten that time frame. And as I was showing in the example, going from concept to commercial launch of this robot in 18 months. Which was absolutely phenomenal and shows the power of the process if followed correctly. The last question on the dilution for founders, I didn't quite understand that question. What is that question? Could Vito, if you don't mind, adding a little bit more color to it?
I think because he's Vito, more funding will be needed.
Very, very, very. I mean, that's absolutely very good point, right? Is the longer the process, more funding you need, right? Which is partly why it is so mission critical. When I spent the last 4 years in venture world, and the longer the process gets, the more complex the process gets. You will absolutely need more funding, and all of us who have founded companies know that end of the day it becomes a struggle, and this is exactly why going back to the framework, going back to thinking in terms of this iterative process, bring the voice of the customer early and often can actually significantly shorten the launch time, and hence their funding needs can go down drastically. As you can see with the surgical robot example, which we looked at, some of our colleagues here mentioned long time frames. We did this in 18 months. So that's where thinking closer, and more than happy to have offline conversations as well, thinking closer about the process and bringing some of these elements smartly into the design controls can bring speed, efficacy, and efficiency all three at the same time while delivering a product that our customers care about.
Yeah, and also Vito will be speaking because he comes from a venture capital funding background. He'll be speaking today at 11:35 to 12, and he'll be talking about the pandemic challenges. So definitely drop by for that talk too. Yeah. So if there's any other questions for you can let us know here, or you can also email us and we can let him know. We've recorded this session as well, so very soon we'll be publishing his talk, and that way you guys can review it. All right, Subh, it was a pleasure having you joining us this morning.
Thank you, and everybody, please feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to chat offline. This is something which is near and dear to my heart, and I think all of us could benefit from. I'm more than happy to chat, and if you guys are interested, a couple of my colleagues are actually working on writing up a white paper on some of this work. It's going through internal cycles. If you're interested, more than happy to share some of those as well.
Perfect.
With whoever's interested.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And with that said, we will be heading over to our next session by Ryan Mears of Vivonics. We'll be speaking about